At my son's funeral, my daughter-in-law whispered loudly, "I'm not taking care of that old witch." But before he passed, my son had transferred all his assets to me in his will. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end. And comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. The funeral home smelled of lilies and grief. I stood beside my son's casket, my hand resting on the polished mahogany, trying to comprehend how Uriah, my strong, vibrant 35-year-old son, could be lying there so still. The doctor had called it a sudden cardiac arrest. These things sometimes happen, even to young, healthy people, he'd said, as if that explanation could fill the Uriah-shaped hole now torn through my life. Friends and family drifted around me in a fog of black clothing and hushed voices. I'd been accepting condolences, for hours, my face frozen in that mask we wear when we're trying not to fall apart completely. My fingers traced the wooden edge of the casket, the last physical boundary between me and my child. Victoria. Mr. Patterson, Uriah's attorney, touched my elbow gently. "When you're ready, we need to discuss some matters." I nodded numbly. Nothing seemed to matter now, certainly not business or legal issues. But I followed him to a small side room, away from the receiving line and the quiet murmurs of sympathy. That's when I saw her, Grace, my daughter-in-law, huddled in the corner with her sister. My son had been so in love with her. Even when they'd first started dating 10 years ago, I'd seen the way he looked at her, like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life. I was about to approach them when Grace's voice, sharper than I'd ever heard it, cut through the muffled atmosphere. "You know they're going to read the will tomorrow, right?" she was whispering, but the acoustics in the room carried her words clearly to where I stood. "I just hope he didn't leave anything substantial to Victoria." Her sister murmured something I couldn't hear. "I know, right? I mean, I'm his wife. Everything should come to me." Grace's voice dripped with a bitterness I'd never heard before. "I've spent 7 years with him, putting up with his mother constantly being around, giving opinions on everything from our house to how we should raise the kids." I froze, my hand still on the doorframe. "What if she expects to move in with you now?" her sister asked. Grace laughed. Actually laughed, here at my son's funeral. "I'd rather die. I mean it." Her voice dropped even lower, but in the quiet room, I could still hear the venom in her words. "I'm the one who has to pick up the pieces now. I'm the one who has to raise our children alone. I'm sure as hell not going to care for that old Megara, too." The room spun. Old Megara. Was that how she'd seen me all this time? The meddling, domineering mother-in-law? I'd tried so hard to be respectful of their marriage, to only offer help when asked. I'd watched my grandson 2 days a week so Grace could continue her part-time job. I'd brought meals when Uriah had to work late. I'd thought we had a good relationship. The key? "Reading will be tomorrow at 10 a.m., Mr. Patterson was saying, unaware of what I'd just overheard. "I wanted to prepare you, Victoria. Uriah made some changes to his will recently." I struggled to focus on his words, Grace's cruel comments still ringing in my ears. "Changes?" I asked, my voice sounding distant even to myself. "Yes." "About 3 weeks ago?" He hesitated. "He transferred almost everything to you, Victoria, not to Grace." "What?" I stared at him. "But that doesn't make sense. Grace is his wife. The children—" "He set up trust funds for the children that will mature when they turn 25, Patterson explained quietly. "But the house, his investments, the insurance money, it's all coming to you. He was quite explicit about it." My mind reeled. Why would Uriah do this? He'd always been thoughtful, deliberate in his decisions. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment choice. Behind us, Grace had spotted me. Her face shifted from annoyed to a practiced mask of grief, all traces of her earlier contempt vanishing. But I'd Seen it now, the real Grace, the one who existed when she thought no one was watching. "Victoria," she said, approaching with arms outstretched for an embrace. "I'm so sorry. We're all just trying to process this horrible loss." As she hugged me, her perfume suffocating, all I could think was, my son knew. Somehow my son knew exactly who she was. And now, I was beginning to understand too. The reading of the will was everything I dreaded and more. Grace sat across from me at the conference table, her face a storm of barely contained rage as Mr. Patterson confirmed what he'd told me at the funeral. Uriah had changed his will just 3 weeks before his death, leaving almost everything to me instead of her. "This can't be legal," Grace snapped, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the leather portfolio she'd brought. "He was obviously not in his right mind." "I assure you, Mrs. Carson, your husband was of sound mind and body when he made these changes," Mr. Patterson said, his voice carrying the practiced calm of someone who'd weathered many family disputes. He was quite adamant about his decisions. The drive home afterward was a blur. Grace had stormed out of the office, refusing to speak to me. Part of me wanted to reach out, to try to understand, to maintain some connection to my grandchildren, but the memory of her words at the funeral, "I'm sure as hell not going to care for that old Megara," kept me silent. 3 days later, I stood in Uriah's home office, surrounded by the remnants of my son's life. Grace had reluctantly given me the key, claiming she couldn't bear to sort through his things yet. The house felt hollow, abandoned, though Grace and the children still lived there. They'd gone to stay with her parents for a few days, giving me space to collect Uriah's personal effects. I ran my fingers along his desk, remembering how he'd sit here on Sunday afternoons when the children were napping, working on whatever project had captured his imagination that week. The leather chair still held the impression of his body. That's when I noticed the drawer, slightly ajar, with a small key still in the lock. Uriah had always been meticulous about security. He wouldn't have left it unlocked unless... My hands trembled as I pulled the drawer open. Inside was a thick manila folder labeled simply "Financial Records." I shouldn't pry, I thought. But something compelled me to open it. What I found inside made my blood run cold. Credit card statements, loan applications, bank notices, dozens of them, spanning the last 2 years. And paper-clipped to the front was a handwritten note in Uriah's neat, precise handwriting. "Mom, if you're reading this, I'm so sorry. I should have told you sooner." Tears blurred my vision as I sifted through the documents. The story they told was devastating. Grace had been systematically draining their accounts for months, maybe years. Cash withdrawals at casinos, online gambling sites, luxury purchases returned for cash, and loans, so many loans, taken out in Uriah's name, some with interest rates that made me gasp. "Oh, Uriah," I whispered, my heart breaking all over again. "Why didn't you tell me?" As if in answer, a small USB drive fell from between the papers. I plugged it into Uriah's computer and found a single video file dated just 3 weeks ago, the same time he'd changed his will. My son's face filled the screen, looking tired but resolute. "Mom," he began, his voice sending a fresh wave of grief through me. "If you're watching this, then things have probably gotten worse with Grace, and you're finding out everything the hard way. I'm sorry for that." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my chest ache. "I discovered Grace's gambling problem about 6 months ago. At first I thought we could work through it. I got her into therapy, set up separate accounts. But it's deeper than I initially realized." He sighed heavily. "Last week, I found out she's been taking loans from some unsavory characters, people who don't exactly follow legal collection practices." My hand covered my mouth in horror. "I'm changing my will today," he continued. "If something happens to me, you need to be protected. The house, The investments, they need to go to you. You'll make sure the kids are taken care of, I know that. Grace. His voice broke. I love her, Mom. I still do. But I can't trust her with our future anymore. The video ended, and I sat in the gathering darkness of his office, the pieces finally falling into place. The sudden cardiac arrest that took my athletic, health-conscious son, the mysterious changes to his will, the venomous way Grace had spoken about me at the funeral. Had the stress of Grace's betrayal contributed to his heart attack? Or was there something even more sinister at play? A noise from the front of the house startled me. Footsteps in the hallway. Grace was back. I quickly closed the computer and gathered the documents, slipping them into my bag. Whatever was happening here, I needed to be careful, for my safety, for my grandchildren's future, and for Uriah's memory. Victoria? Grace's voice called out, honey sweet and completely at odds with the woman I'd glimpsed at the funeral. Are you still here? I brought dinner. I took a deep breath and stepped out of the office, clutching my son's secrets close. I was just finishing up, I said, forcing a smile. How thoughtful of you to bring food. Her eyes flickered to my bag, then back to my face, her smile never reaching her eyes. Well, we're family, aren't we? We need to stick together now more than ever. As I followed her to the kitchen, one thought crystallized in my mind. My son had tried to protect me. Now it was my turn to protect what he'd left behind. 2 months after Uriah's funeral, my world had shrunk to the size of my living room. The phone rarely rang anymore. The invitations to community events had stopped coming. My weekly bridge club had regretfully informed me that they were restructuring the groups, and somehow, there wasn't room for me anymore. I knew who was behind it all. Grace had always been popular in our small community, charming, beautiful, and skilled at presenting herself as the perfect wife and mother. Now she was equally skilled at presenting herself as the grieving widow cruelly deprived of her rightful inheritance by a greedy mother-in-law. Did you hear what Victoria did to poor Grace? I'd overheard Mrs. Pembroke whispering to another woman at the grocery store last week. Taking everything after Uriah died, leaving Grace and those poor children with practically nothing. And after all Grace did, caring for Victoria when she had that hip surgery last year, I'd abandoned my cart and left without the groceries I needed, my cheeks burning with humiliation. The narrative Grace had spun bore no resemblance to reality. She'd visited me exactly twice during my recovery, both times with Uriah. But the community had embraced it wholly. Even worse was what she'd done with my grandchildren. Emma, 9, and Lucas, 6, had been the lights of my life. Before Uriah's death, I'd seen them 3 or 4 times a week. Now my calls went unanswered, my messages unreturned. When I did manage to speak with them, they were distant and guarded. Last weekend, I'd finally confronted Grace about it when she dropped the children off for a rare visit. You'll only have them for 2 hours, she'd said, checking her watch. I have to take them to a birthday party later. Grace, we need to talk about what's happening, I'd said, keeping my voice low so the children wouldn't hear from the backyard. Why are you turning everyone against me? Why are you keeping the children away? Her face had transformed, the pleasant mask slipping to reveal the cold calculation beneath. I don't know what you're talking about, Victoria. Maybe people are just finally seeing you for who you really are. A controlling, selfish woman who couldn't let her son live his own life. That's not true, and you know it, I'd protested. Uriah changed his will because he discovered what you were doing with your gambling. Gambling? She'd laughed, but I saw panic flash in her eyes. Is that the story you're telling people? Now? My God, Victoria, listen to yourself. First you steal my inheritance, now you're inventing addictions for me. No wonder nobody wants to be around you anymore. She'd stepped closer, her voice dropping to a menacing whisper. Let me make something perfectly clear. Those are my children. If you want to see them at all, you'll keep your crazy accusations To yourself, and you'll start transferring Uriah's assets back where they belong, to me. That night, after they'd left, I'd sat alone in my kitchen, a cup of tea growing cold in front of me. The silence of the house pressed in from all sides. For the first time since Uriah died, I allowed myself to cry, deep, racking sobs that left me gasping for breath. The isolation was working. I'd started to question myself, to wonder if I was the villain in this story. Maybe I had been too controlling. Maybe Uriah had changed his will for other reasons. Maybe Grace's gambling wasn't as serious as I'd thought. The next morning, I found myself in Dr. Meyer's office. He'd been our family doctor for 20 years, had watched Uriah grow from a teenager into a man. Surely he, at least, wouldn't have turned against me. But as he examined me, his manner was cool, professional where it had once been warm and friendly. "You seem anxious, Victoria," he said, making notes in my chart without meeting my eyes. "Having trouble sleeping?" "Yes," I admitted. "I've been under a lot of stress since Uriah died." He nodded, still not looking at me. "Grace mentioned she's concerned about your mental state, said you've been making some strange accusations, having trouble distinguishing fact from fiction." My blood ran cold. "Grace talked to you about me?" "She's worried," he said simply. "She thinks you might be in the early stages of dementia. The paranoia, the mood swings, the irrational behavior with the will. I'm not." I struggled to find words, shocked by how thoroughly Grace had poisoned even this relationship. Dr. Myers finally met my eyes. "I'm prescribing you something for anxiety, and I'd like you to see a neurologist, just to rule things out." I left with a prescription I had no intention of filling, and the crushing realization that Grace was systematically destroying not just my reputation, but my credibility. If she succeeded in convincing people I was becoming mentally incompetent, what would stop her from challenging the will on those grounds? As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number. "We need to talk about Grace. Meet me at Riverside Cafe tomorrow at 10. Come alone. Olivia." Grace's sister wanted to meet me? My heart raced as I reread the message. After months of isolation, could I finally have found an ally? Riverside Cafe sat on the edge of town, far enough away that Grace and her friends weren't likely to spot me there. I arrived early, choosing a corner table with my back to the wall where I could see everyone who entered. The waitress brought me coffee with a smile that held no judgment or pity, the first such smile I'd received in weeks. Exactly at 10, Olivia walked in. She was Grace's younger sister, but they couldn't have been more different. Where Grace was polished and perfect, Olivia was natural and relaxed. Today, she wore jeans and a simple sweater, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She spotted me immediately and walked over, sliding into the seat across from me without a greeting. "Did anyone see you come here?" she asked, her voice low. Shook my head. "I don't think so. Olivia, why all the secrecy? What's this about?" She took a deep breath, fidgeting with the paper napkin in front of her. "I've been wanting to talk to you since the funeral, but Grace watches me like a hawk. She knows I've never approved of how she treats people." The waitress approached, and Olivia ordered coffee, waiting until we were alone again before continuing. "Victoria, I need you to know that I believe you. About everything, the gambling, the loans, all of it." My hands trembled as I set my cup down. "You do? But how?" "Because I've seen it before." Olivia's expression hardened. "This isn't the first time. Grace has done this. Before she met Uriah, she was engaged to a man named Derek. Wealthy family, good prospects. She nearly destroyed him financially before his parents intervened." A dull roar filled my ears as Olivia continued, explaining how Grace had exhibited these patterns their entire lives, finding vulnerable people, charming them, then exploiting them for her own gain. "Our parents enabled it," Olivia said, disgust evident in her voice. They thought her beauty and charm were her gifts, and they should be used to secure her future. They encouraged her to find wealthy men, to do whatever it took to maintain a certain lifestyle. But she seemed to love Uriah, I protested weakly. They appeared happy. Olivia's smile was sad. Grace is an excellent actress, and maybe she did love him in her way. But when she loves something, she consumes it. She takes and takes until there's nothing left. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small notebook. I've been documenting everything. The lies she's told about you, the way she's manipulated the children, the community. She told our parents you were abusive to Uriah throughout his childhood, that you controlled him with money. The injustice of it hit me like a physical blow. Why would she say these things? Because she's desperate, Olivia said simply. Whatever Uriah discovered, it must have been bad. Really bad. She needs that inheritance, Victoria. Not just for the lifestyle, but to cover her tracks. What tracks? I asked, a chill running through me. Olivia hesitated. I don't have proof, just suspicions. But I think some of the people Grace borrowed from aren't just loan sharks. I think they might be connected to more serious criminals. The cafe suddenly felt too small, too exposed. Are you saying? I'm saying you need to be careful, Olivia cut in. Grace isn't just spreading rumors to be petty. She's methodically destroying your credibility because she's afraid of what you might discover. The dementia story? Classic Grace. She did the same thing to our grandmother when the old lady caught her stealing jewelry. My mind raced, connecting dots I hadn't seen before. The way Dr. Myers had looked at me. The community's sudden rejection. The children's strange behavior. She's gaslighting me, I said, the term coming from an article I'd read years ago. Making me doubt my own sanity. Exactly, Olivia nodded vigorously. And she's good at it. She's had plenty of practice. I thought of all the months I'd spent questioning myself, wondering if I really was the villain in this story. The relief of being believed, of having my experiences validated, was overwhelming. What should I do? I asked, hating the tremor in my voice. Document everything, Olivia said firmly. Every strange interaction, every rumor that gets back to you, every time she restricts access to the children. And don't take anything she gives you. No food, no drinks, no medication. You think she would? I couldn't even finish the sentence. Olivia's expression was grave. I don't know what she's capable of anymore. The Grace I grew up with was manipulative and selfish, but I never thought she'd go this far. The pressure must be immense if she's taking these kinds of risks. She glanced at her watch. I need to go. Grace thinks I'm at the gym. She pulled out a burner phone and slid it across the table. Use this to contact me. My number is the only one programmed in it. Don't use your regular phone. I wouldn't put it past her to have someone monitoring your calls. As she stood to leave? She hesitated, then reached out and squeezed my hand. You're not crazy, Victoria. You're not the bad guy here. Remember that. After she left, I sat for a long time, clutching the phone she'd given me like a lifeline. For the first time in months, I felt a spark of something I'd almost forgotten. Hope. That evening, as I sorted through more of Uriah's papers, I found something I'd missed before. A small key taped to the back of his desk drawer with a note that simply said, Storage Unit Number 17, Main Street Lock and Key. Whatever Uriah had discovered about Grace, whatever had prompted him to change his will so drastically, the evidence might be sitting in that storage unit. Tomorrow, I would find out what my son had been hiding, and what Grace was so desperate to keep buried. As I held the key in my palm, a strange calm settled over me. The fog of grief and confusion was lifting, replaced by a clear sense of purpose. Grace had underestimated me, treating me like a helpless old woman she could easily manipulate and discard. She was about to discover just how wrong she was. Main Street Lock and Key was a nondescript building on the edge of downtown, the kind of place you could drive past 100 times without noticing. The morning air was crisp as I pulled into the nearly empty parking lot, clutching Uriah's key in my hand. My heart pounded with anticipation and fear. What would I find inside? The facility manager barely glanced at my ID before directing me to Unit Number 17, a small storage space at the end of a dimly lit hallway. The lock turned with a satisfying click, and I pulled up the rolling metal door. Inside, neatly organized and labeled, were dozens of boxes. But what caught my eye immediately was a large whiteboard propped against the back wall, covered in Uriah's precise handwriting. It was a timeline, stretching back 3 years, documenting Grace's activities in meticulous detail: cash withdrawals, casino visits, online gambling accounts, unexplained absences. Each entry was annotated with dates, amounts, and sometimes photographs. "Oh, Uriah," I whispered, tracing my fingers over his handwriting. "You were investigating her." One box was labeled simply evidence. Inside, I found bank statements, credit card bills, loan documents, all carefully organized. But it was the USB drive at the bottom that made my hands shake. I slipped it into my pocket, knowing I needed to review it somewhere private. The storage unit contained something else: a leather-bound journal. The first entry was dated 3 years ago, just after Emma's 6th birthday. The final entry was dated 4 days before Uriah's death. "I confronted Grace today," the last entry read. "Showed her what I've found. She denied everything at first, then became hysterical. Says I don't understand the pressure she's been under. She's right. I don't understand how anyone could gamble away our children's future, could put us in debt to the kind of people who make threats. She begged me not to tell anyone, especially not Mom. Said she'd get help, that we could work through this. I want to believe her. For the kids' sake, I need to believe her. But I've changed the will today, just in case. If anything happens to me, Mom will make sure the kids are protected." Tears blurred my vision as I closed the journal. Uriah had known everything and had confronted Grace just 4 days before his sudden cardiac arrest. I spent hours in that storage unit, photographing documents, reading through Uriah's notes, assembling the pieces of a puzzle I'd never wanted to solve. By the time I left, slipping the most crucial evidence into my purse, I was a different woman than the one who had arrived that morning. The fog of grief and self-doubt had burned away, replaced by a cold, clear purpose. Grace had to be stopped, not just for me, but for my grandchildren. That afternoon, I called Olivia from the burner phone. "I found Uriah's evidence," I told her, my voice steadier than it had been in months. "It's worse than we thought. I think Grace might have had something to do with Uriah's death." Olivia's sharp intake of breath was audible. That's a serious accusation, Victoria." "I know, and I can't prove it. Not yet. But Uriah confronted her about the gambling just days before he died. And look at how systematically she's worked to discredit me since then. She's terrified. I'll discover the truth." "What are you going to do?" Olivia asked. "Fight back," I said simply. "Will you help me?" 2 days later, Olivia and I met with Dr. Carlson, a respected neurologist in the next town over, someone with no connection to Grace or her social circle. I underwent a complete workup, cognitive tests, brain scans, the works. "Mrs. Carson," Dr. Carlson said when the results came back, "I can state with absolute certainty that you show no signs of dementia or cognitive impairment. In fact, your mental acuity is exceptional for a woman of any age." I asked for his findings, in writing, which he provided along with a statement addressing the concerns that had been raised about my mental state. Next, I hired a private investigator named Marcus, a referral from Olivia. He was expensive, but with access to Uriah's money, that was no longer a concern. "I need documentation of everything Grace is doing," I told him. "The rumors she's spreading, the people she's meeting with, all of it. And I need to know who she borrowed money from. Meanwhile, I began rebuilding my social connections, starting with Barbara, my oldest friend, who had withdrawn from me after hearing Grace's rumors. "I've missed you," I said simply when she cautiously accepted my invitation to coffee. Barbara looked uncomfortable. "I heard some things, Victoria, about how you treated Uriah, about the will." I slid Dr. Carlson's report across the table. "Grace has been telling people I have dementia. This proves I don't. She's also told people I was abusive to Uriah. I have decades of birthday cards, letters, and photographs that show otherwise." I met Barbara's eyes. "She's destroying my reputation because she's afraid of what I know." Slowly, methodically, I began to reclaim my life. I joined a new bridge club in the neighboring town. I volunteered at the library, where the head librarian, who had never liked Grace, welcomed me warmly. I started a blog documenting my journey as a widow, carefully writing about my grief without mentioning the darker currents beneath. Each small victory strengthened me. Each piece of evidence Marcus uncovered, and there were many, confirmed what I already knew. Grace was desperate, dangerous, and coming undone. The final piece fell into place when Marcus discovered who had loaned Grace money, a man named Vincent Carrera, who had connections to organized crime in Chicago. "She owes him over $200,000, Marcus told me gravely. "And his kind don't extend payment terms." 2 days later, I invited Grace and the children to dinner. It was time for a confrontation, but this time, I would be the one in control. As I set the table that evening, I felt oddly calm. The doorbell rang, and I squared my shoulders, ready to face the woman who had tried to destroy me. But I wasn't defenseless anymore. I had truth on my side, and more importantly, evidence. Game on, Grace. Game on. 3 years have passed since that fateful dinner with Grace. I still remember how she arrived at my house, all perfect makeup and forced smiles, the children trailing behind her. "Grandma!" Emma had cried, running to hug me. At 9, she was still young enough to be openly affectionate. Lucas, at 6, hung back, eyeing me warily, a product of whatever stories Grace had been telling him. Come in," I'd said warmly, ushering them inside. "Dinner's almost ready." Grace had looked around suspiciously, perhaps expecting to see police officers or lawyers waiting to ambush her. Instead, she found only a carefully prepared meal and a grandmother eager to see her grandchildren. The confrontation, when it came, was after the children were settled in the living room with a movie. "I know everything, Grace," I'd said quietly, sliding a folder across the table. "The gambling, the loans from Vincent Carrera, the lies you've spread about me." Her face had drained of color. "I don't know what you're—" "Please don't insult my intelligence," I'd interrupted. "Uriah documented it all before he died. I've found his storage unit." For a moment, genuine fear had flashed in her eyes. Then, her expression hardened. "So what? It's your word against mine. Everyone already thinks you're losing your mind." I'd smiled then, a small, satisfied smile. "Not anymore, they don't. I have a neurological workup proving I'm completely sound. I have statements from your sister confirming your history of manipulation. I have evidence that you owe $200,000 to a man connected to organized crime, and I have all of Uriah's documentation." Her hands had trembled as she reached for her wine glass. "What do you want?" "A truce," I'd said simply. "I don't want to destroy you, Grace. I just want to be part of my grandchildren's lives. I want the rumors to stop. I want peace." She'd studied me, perhaps searching for weakness or deception. "And if I refuse?" "Then I'll take everything I have to the police. The gambling might not be illegal, but the loans, the connection to Carrera, those will interest them very much, especially given the timing of Uriah's death." "Are you accusing me of—" Her voice had risen in panic. I'm not accusing you of anything, I'd cut in. I'm simply stating facts. Uriah confronted you about the gambling and loans 4 days before he died. He changed his will to protect the children's inheritance. And then he had a sudden cardiac event at 35. Grace had collapsed back in her chair, her facade crumbling completely. For the first time, I'd seen the real woman beneath all the masks, frightened, desperate, cornered. I didn't kill him. She'd whispered, tears streaking her makeup. I swear I didn't. The stress, the fight we had, maybe that contributed, but I never wanted him dead. I loved him, in my way. I'd studied her face, searching for truth in her eyes. To this day, I'm not sure if I believe her, but in that moment, I'd made a choice for peace, for my grandchildren, for my own future. Here's what's going to happen, I'd told her. I'm going to pay off your debt to Carrera, not for you, but to get that kind of criminal element away from my grandchildren. In exchange, you will give me regular, unhindered access to Emma and Lucas. You will stop spreading rumors about me, and you will seek treatment for your gambling addiction. She'd agreed immediately, relief flooding her face. I think she'd expected much worse. Now, 3 years later, on a warm spring afternoon, I sit in my garden watching Emma and Lucas play. They spend weekends with me now, a schedule we settled on after Grace completed her treatment program. She still lives in Uriah's house, but it's in my name, a fact that ensures her continued cooperation. The rose bushes Uriah and I planted together years ago are in full bloom, their fragrance filling the air. I've added new varieties each year, a way of keeping him present in this space we both loved. Grandma, look, Emma calls, holding up a small ceramic pot. At 12, she's showing real talent for pottery, a hobby we discovered together. I made this for Mom's birthday. I smile, examining the delicately crafted bowl. It's beautiful, sweetheart. She'll love it. Lucas, now 9, is sprawled on the grass nearby, deep in a book about dinosaurs. He looks so much like Uriah at that age that sometimes it catches my breath. Our relationship with Grace remains complicated. The trust that was shattered can never be fully repaired. But we've reached a kind of peace, a détente built on mutual understanding. She knows I hold her secrets. I know she's capable of incredible deception. But we both love these children, and that common ground has become our foundation. The money that caused so much strife has found better purpose. I've established trust funds for Emma and Lucas, just as Uriah wanted. I've renovated my home to include special spaces for them, a pottery studio for Emma, a reading nook for Lucas. And I've set aside funds for Grace's ongoing treatment, ensuring she can manage the addiction that nearly destroyed all our lives. Sometimes I wonder what Uriah would think of this arrangement. Would he approve of the compromise I reached with Grace? Would he understand why I chose not to pursue the question of his death more aggressively? I like to believe he would. My son was always practical, always compassionate. He changed his will, not out of vindictiveness, but out of love, to protect what mattered most. Last week, I finally fulfilled a promise I'd made to Uriah years ago. We'd always talked about visiting Italy together, exploring the hills of Tuscany, the villages where our ancestors had lived. With Emma and Lucas beside me, I scattered a small portion of his ashes beneath an ancient olive tree, its silvery leaves shimmering in the breeze. "Is Dad happy here, Grandma?" Lucas had asked, his small hand gripping mine. "I think he is," I'd answered, watching as the wind carried the ashes into the Italian countryside. "But he's happiest knowing we're together, that we're taking care of each other." The children and I have started a new tradition. Each year on Uriah's birthday, we plant something new in my garden. A tree, a rose bush, a bed of his favorite flowers. This living memorial grows more beautiful each year, nurtured by our hands and our memories. Life after loss isn't about forgetting. It's not even about forgiving sometimes. It's about finding a way forward that honors what was lost while embracing what remains. The garden of my life was scorched and barren after Uriah died, after Grace's betrayal. But slowly, season by season, it's growing again, different than before, but no less beautiful. Tonight, as the children help me prepare dinner in my kitchen, laughing and arguing and creating the beautiful chaos of family, I feel Uriah's presence in the rhythm of our lives. He is here in Emma's smile, in Lucas's thoughtful frown, in the legacy of love that no deception could ever truly destroy. This is his last gift to me, this second chance at family, this hard-won peace. And I intend to cherish every moment of it,